Hope TV is now available on GoTV Channel 103, Zuku Channel 873, Signet Channel 817 and Star Times Channel 026. Enjoy our uplifting content and family-friendly programming anytime. Hope TV, you look and live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Well, like we say, it all depends from which time zone you've tuned in. Welcome to The Leader. And today, we are very glad to have with us Bishop Callisto Odede, the presiding bishop of Sitam. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much, Edmund. Glad to be with you this morning.
Asante sana.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into it because the topic for today is all about how the church can engage going forward. The context, of course, being the electioneering period that we have been as a country.
Yeah.
It's just a couple of days back that the Supreme Court gave its verdict in terms of what was being petitioned.
Yes.
So, maybe let's begin with a question that my cab driver asked me as I was coming for this show.
Yes.
When I told him I'm coming for the show and I'm going to have with me on set Bishop Callisto, he said, we've just gone through an electioneering period. And then he posed the question, is not winning losing?
Wow.
Then I told him, good question, I will ask. I'll ask.
Your cab driver should have been a philosopher rather than a cab driver.
Yes.
But I think there are aspects in which depending on what you are aiming for when you are vying for a position, elective position, that it may appear like you have actually lost. And that is if your motives were wrong, if you are vying for self-aggrandizement, rather than if you are looking at it at a broader picture. And sometimes for people who have voted, it may appear like a candidate that you did not vote for has won. So for you, it certainly is losing. So both aspects are there, that in one way, one would see themselves as losing, depending on whether it was their candidate. And for the person who has vied, if you are vying for the wrong reason, then the country has lost.
I like the way you've brought that. But the place of the voter, because there are those who then say, I will not cast my ballot in favor of Bishop Callisto because I know he cannot win. But like you said, it's motive. So then one would think that their ballot, is not going to make a difference.
Yes.
But what about the place of those who vie, knowing that they may not necessarily win, because the process or the format that we've chosen is one that we have subscribed to.
Yes.
And there's a marking scheme of the 50% plus one vote.
That's right.
Where both of you may not win, but none of you has lost, but you just didn't pass according to the marking scheme.
Yes.
What would your comment be on that?
Yeah, I think you've raised two issues there. One, the voter, the other one, the candidate.
Yes.
The voter, let's come to the point that is quite unfortunate when IEBC informs us that it is only 64%, 65% of registered voters who eventually voted, which means the other 35% did not either think it was important enough to cast their votes or for one reason or another were held back from voting. But that decision not to vote, either because your candidate is not a popular candidate, is actually voting.
Yes. It's a decision you've made.
It's a decision you are making.
Yes.
And there are countries where sometimes people have what we call a protest vote. And a protest vote is where you vote because you don't want a certain candidate in, not necessarily because you want your candidate to win. You'll still vote, but you are voting even if your candidate is not the one going to win, but you're voting to deny someone else an opportunity to win. And I think that has its place, so that no one should say, I have a preference for this candidate, but I don't think he's going to win, therefore I'm not going to vote. I think every one of us, it's our duty, it's our responsibility, it's part of the role of citizenship to register and to vote. Every one of us, anytime we have a voting, should vote, because that vote speaks. Even when I withhold it, I'm still making a statement by withholding it.
Are you suggesting then that one of the options, let's speak here hypothetically, if we have 4, let's pick the seat of presidential candidate, where we had 4 of them who had been shortlisted. Are you suggesting we should have had a 5th option that says none of the above?
That would have been lovely for the people who perhaps would not have voted for someone else, but for someone who was already on the ballot. But I think the important thing is we all have at least someone that we can agree with, either their policies or their character or what they stand for, that we can say this person here, at least in terms of his character, in terms of his policy, in terms of what they stand for, we can actually vote for this person. Now, that has not always been the case, because you've raised a very important issue. What makes Kenyans really vote? And when we look at the scenario over the last few years when we have had our elections, I prefer to call our elections emotional democracy. And I call it emotional democracy because what really propels people to vote, at some point we used to say it was a lot to do with ethnicity. If my person is there, or my person who comes from my community is there, then I will vote for that person. But more and more is shifting to what I call emotional, because it's the person who would be able to paint emotions that can grab me, the person who is able to bring a picture of either emotions of hatred, emotions of fear, emotions of passion and love. And a person who is able to bring that tends to be my candidate. Now, coming to the other question that you raised about the candidates, why do people go on the ballot box when actually they know that they are not going to make it? One, some people are preparing for a future shot again at the same seat. In other words, they are thinking people need to know I exist, and by going on, I actually will
get profiled.
Yes, I will raise my profile, and people will say, oh, he was on the last time, now we can give him our votes. Secondly, there are some people who go into it because they are calculating. And the ones who are calculating is if we can be able to deny the prominent candidates the 50+1%, then we have a rerun. In the rerun, we actually have a chance of being given a certain position in the next government if they ask us to support. So they are calculating whatever position they would want to get in the next government. And then, of course, there are other people who just want to be celebrities. Let my name be there, and I want to be known. Then the final category are those who are hoping they can be nominated. They start the journey, and along the way they hope someone will tell them, come and support me, and then they will be nominated to a position. So various reasons, I think, that makes people allow their names to be on the on the voting card when actually they automatically know they may not go very, very far.
Now, this brings us to the important role of the church, and here looking at how then has the church been pastoring leaders? And here I'd want you to speak to the candidates. Does the journey just start now? Did it start before? Is it during? Because there are those who subjectively think that they only see the church when there is tension and strife, because you don't necessarily always go out there from the mountaintops and shout. How does the church, how do you pastor leaders, like in your case?
Thank you. A very, very important question. And I think this is a process, and a process that begins, for some of us, a process that begins by preparing people for positions of leadership, where you deliberately get people within the church who are interested and are keen in political positions, and you begin working with them towards preparing them towards political positions. Prior to the elections, a number of us were very, very keen on what was happening in the country. So we got involved. We got involved in a group that even planned for a seminar on politics in the country. We even invited the president of Zambia, who spoke online.
Yes.
We brought in people who are vying for different political positions, and we had a seminar in one of the hotels in Nairobi, and a fairly well publicized seminar. And the idea was to be able to start some kind of conversation. What kind of politics do we actually want to have within Kenya as a nation? And out of that came a Bible study guide.
Yes, I recall Church and Politics.
Yes, Church and Politics, which we've used, a number of us, especially the church that I belong to, CITAM, I used it in all our church assemblies. For almost 2 months, every Sunday, people will be reading and preparing that. Then on top of that, again as CITAM, we made a decision to be holding meetings in counties. So I crisscrossed the country in counties, meeting with political leaders, so people who are vying for politics, and just sharing with them on what good qualities of leadership do we expect when people become members of parliament or various political positions, not just parliament as well. We went ahead and on Sundays, in our Sunday services, we also preached messages that were touching on leadership and on politics for almost 2-3 months before the elections. On top of that, I can, now that it is over, I can say I had meetings with a number of individuals who are vying for political position at personal level. Where we were able to talk some matters and some issues. Some of them came to consult me, others I got in touch with. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this, it is a process, because if we are only thinking that the church's engagement is what is visible in the media or what is being seen publicly, I think we are missing the point. For some of us who do know, the church has been quite involved behind the scene and not necessarily appearing on front pages of the newspaper in an amazing way. So I just want to encourage that. And also working towards peaceful coexistence in trying to bring people and communities together where sometimes there have been tension. I think the church has done quite a bit of that. And I'm not just talking of CITAM as a church. I do know other churches also which have been engaged in similar kind of things.
Indeed. And we don't necessarily always have to shout about it in terms of the engagement. And going forward, because there are those through that process, like you say, and it is continuous. It is one that, because where is church? Church is you and I where we are at, not just necessarily on Sunday when we're having the service or during the prayers, as it were. And the congregation, because you've been engaging with the leadership, how did you manage to stay apolitical without being perceived to be leaning one side or the other?
That's a difficult question, Edmund, because and it's a question where I must confess a number of my colleagues have struggled. And my colleagues, I mean clergymen like myself. I think this requires a bit of reflection, because if the clergy especially do not go through a process of reflection, then they are likely to show their hands in the open. And if you do that, it damages your ministry. So what we did in the process of sharing with people, we said our members need not only to be involved in the political process, because the political process in Kenya sometimes is actually won in the primaries. at the political party levels. And what that would mean, therefore, is if we do not participate in the political party levels, we actually are missing a point also as members of Kenya. Because there are some areas, if you are elected in the primaries, then you automatically... It's as good as done. The deal is done.
For the oath, the swearing in.
You're just waiting for the swearing in.
Yeah.
The deal is actually done. And if our members are not participating in the primaries, and that requires that you belong to a political party, that requires that you engage in a political party for you to be effectively involved in that arena. And we encourage our members, identify your people, your party, get involved, participate in the political party of your choice. But as leaders, because we have members who are coming from different congregations, although we may have a preference in terms of a candidate, whether parliamentarian or MCA or presidential, that we would want to vote for, that choice will remain secret. And the reason we would choose to go secret is because if we come out openly, we are not able to minister to people who are actually coming from a different angle. So let our members have their preferences, but as the clergy, we need to stay in such a situation that we can minister in both levels. Why? One, in case there is a situation that needs conflict resolutions, the church needs to play that role. And there is no way that I will be able to play a role of reconciling two people who are fighting when already they know I am for one person. I can't be able to play that role. And two, it's very, very important that on Sunday after the elections, that people from different parties would come to my church and they would know here I'm going to be ministered to, I'm going to be encouraged. How are they going to come to my church when already they know I didn't like their candidate? I hurt them, I wounded them. As a matter of fact, immediately after the elections, we dealt with a lot of issues. People were writing to us and were saying, my pastor took sides. I've even lost faith in going to church anymore because my pastor took sides. Now, that can be avoided by creating a situation where the clergy actually are open and broad-minded enough to minister to people from different angles. And I think a third thing that I need to mention, and I've become a little more passionate about this recently, is that it is a lack of understanding of what I call political spirituality. And political spirituality is where we come out and we begin thinking that there is a candidate whom God is supporting. And so if we don't support that candidate, then we will be missing out on God. Now, that's very, very narrow because political spirituality requires that we begin to see God as supporting his own agenda. Rather than God as a God of Christendom, God is a God of kingdom, not Christendom. And when we begin viewing God as a Christendom God, a God who is leaning more towards a little parochial way, we miss actually the kingdom element, because God is a God of the kingdom element. His perspective is much wider. He's a God with an agenda that is universal. And we should not narrow him down to put him in the ballot. And sometimes that's the mistake that the clergy make, that they begin seeing God as one of the candidates who is going to be in the ballot. We need to be broader, and when we are broader, it helps us to be able to engage at a wider perspective, Edmund.
Yes, yeah. Indeed. So how then can we broaden the church mission and agenda to include mission to different spheres of influence? Because there are some, when you look at the profile of those who've managed to get into the elective positions, some are in for the very first time, and they might think that they did it without God being present. Yeah. So how can you broaden the church mission agenda to speak to those different spheres of influence?
Yeah, I think there are 7 important spheres of influence, as we are told by sociologists, that perhaps the church needs to get engaged in. And this goes all the way from media, entertainment, education, economy, and politics as well. as one of those spheres of engagements that the church needs to consider influencing. And positioning ourselves to influence the spheres of engagement is not necessarily that the church needs to get in. And the reason I'm saying that is when we begin thinking that the church needs to be the one that involves in politics, there's I call it a spectrum of engagement that goes all the way from what we were told traditionally. The church should keep away from politics because politics is dirty. So the church should not soil their hands by engaging in politics. And that spectrum goes to the point where the church minister would tell people, you go and vote. Another place where they say we will just pray, but we don't get engaged. And then another place where they say, yes, we have a candidate of our choice and we call an individual. This is the candidate that we are voting for and we support a candidate. Another place where they say, we go on and say a church minister stands for position, elective position, while still holding their church responsibility. And all the way to non-involvement, all the way to a Bible in one hand, a gun in one hand, as we have in liberation theology, all the way to places like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who even engaged as a church minister, pastor, a Lutheran pastor, felt that Hitler needed to be assassinated and even began organizing for the assassination of Hitler. Now, that spectrum exists in any nation during electioneering period. And the church might choose that our role is only at the tail end. Or the church might choose, let's be involved in civic education, where we prepare our people. Or let's be involved in even coaching leaders, people that we should plan ahead of time to actually think of them as possibility of involvement. I'm aware of one church in the city here, which actually said, we may not choose a president, but we can actually be able to choose an MCA. So they
focus now on that space.
A narrow space. They got together and they said, all these candidates, we are going to call them and we want them to make statements. And then we will decide who among them is the one that we all as a church are going to vote for. So they zeroed in on one individual and they said, when we vote you in, you are accountable to us. We will be calling you to accountable. Otherwise, you don't go in again. So that's a possibility of church involvement in terms of getting people into that positions of leadership, preparing candidates, civic education, and at some point looking for people that actually we can encourage to be involved. And I personally would prefer that if you do know, as a church, which sometimes we have done, if you do know someone whom you think can do well in a certain position, whether it is an elective position or whether it is a government policy influencing position, that as church leaders, we need to sometimes be able to say, hey, I have seen this job advertised, and I think you have the qualities that is required for this particular position. Why don't you consider applying for this position? Because we think you'll be able to make a great influence with a godly values and godly characters in this position of influence, and then invite an individual to take that, to apply for that position. That's still the church acting in order to fulfill a certain role in the spheres of influence.
And indeed, I think what you brought out is quite important and key, in that then it speaks to the Great Commission in terms of go and be the salt and the light. And you cannot divorce politics from life and church. We are coexisting and affecting, they are even suggest infecting each other in that space. But the civic education part, because sometimes there are those who would say we have no role there, or we're not enlightened enough, or there was not enough money, because if I didn't hear, if I didn't see it in terms of the traditional, advertisements that goes out, then I feel somebody else didn't do their job, hence we made a choice, one way or the other. How do we hold ourselves accountable as we hold our leaders accountable in that process?
I think what you said, a statement you made there is extremely important, because sometimes it is what has made us disengage in certain spheres of life. You made this statement, a division where we are not influencing the society. The whole idea of dichotomizing our lives into the sacred and the secular, where the sacred is things to do with spirituality and the secular are things to do with the workspace, sometimes endangers our engagement in the society. So as a result of that, we do have church members and Christians who ought to be making a lot of influence, but because they're seeing the separation between their faith and their workspace on Monday to Friday, they don't bring their faith into that workspace. And it's so important that we begin to see that being salt simply means that I don't dichotomize my faith. I don't leave my faith at home or in church on Sunday when I go to the workspace. I carry my faith there. And perhaps that's also one of the challenges that has been spoken about when it comes to Christians in the political arena. That we do have some people that we've known to be Christians, and they go into that space. Then they begin struggling, and we start wondering, how come we are not feeling them? How come their Christian ethos are not coming out? How come they are not bearing and making an impact? And I do think it's because some of them don't take their Christian faith into that space, so that it becomes a source of influence. And then when it comes to civic education, I think civic education is not necessarily when IEBC circulates the brochures that are telling people about elections, or when they publish them on the media. I do know they did publish quite a number of things. I do know they did hold some media reports or times when they talked with people. But on top of that, I do think it's also when church leaders on Sundays during the church services take 3 minutes, and in those 3 minutes you just tell people, this is what we are expecting to happen, and tell people you will go and vote. Out of that voting, there will be two possibilities. Either your candidate will win, your candidate will not win. When your candidate wins, this is the way you need to behave. When your candidate loses, this is the way you need to behave. Now, if none of them wins, the next stage will take place. We will go for a rerun, or if not, the election may be contested. And if election is contested, this is what is likely to happen, and this is what's likely to be the outcome of that. Now, that's civic education, preparing your people so that they actually know these are the things, the outcomes that we can expect in an electioneering stage, because these are things that we have in our constitution. And there are processes that are not being introduced, but processes that we have put in our constitution to help us guide us in the electioneering process. And I do think as church leaders, even doing that on a Sunday, 3 minutes out of the time and alerting your people on what's likely to happen is extremely helpful going forward.
It's very interesting, because then it's an issue of, like now, we have the Constitution. Within that, there's a prescription on how you elect leaders. And if you're dissatisfied, what options do you have? Including not going to the streets, but rather go to the court. But you may not agree with the verdict of the court, but you respect it.
Yeah.
Because justice is not necessarily only when the decision is in your favor. So that then you can say, okay, I don't agree, but I respect.
Yes.
And there are options of holding our leaders to account, where you create informed awareness that, yes, again, in the Constitution, if your elected leader is not performing in your balanced scorecard after 1-2 years, do you know you can recall? So creating awareness in the congregation that recall is an option does not necessarily mean you're anti those who already got themselves into office.
That's right. That's right. I think what you're pointing out is very true. And sometimes it is the lack of awareness and bringing people to a point where they realize that these are our options. And as members, if our leaders that we have voted in take certain direction, we should not either vilify them, and we should not also be in a position where we go the opposite direction, where we agitate and attack certain individuals. We should actually allow them, provided that position is constitutionally enshrined, that this is part of our constitutional journey. Let's allow them to go through this process and come to the end of it. Because what that does for people, it brings a closure. It helps you to bring a closure. If you leave it hanging, you still don't have the closure. So it's important that a person would bring it to a closure, even if they don't agree, say with a court decision, but they have at least brought it to the ultimate closure. Then the process now begins of recovery and of looking ahead to the future. Now, when it comes to parliamentarians, we actually have a possibility of having a recall, as you have pointed out, and bringing that to people's awareness that if you voted someone in on these conditions and they have turned out they are like you had a Magna Carta, an agreement that you had signed together, and they turned out and they are going contrary to the agreement that you had with this person as your member of parliament, that actually you can organize and go through a process that will actually recall them. And if it is a governor, you can go through a process that will bring about impeachment, including signing. I remember in one of the counties, people signed, get some signatures, and those signatures will be used to impeach this person so that they actually are accountable. Now, those are processes that have been put there to help in the accountability of our leaders, and we need to hold them to accountability. When it comes times for making a budgeting for the counties, that actually there will be moments when the county leaders need to bring these things into the public
participation,
so that there is public participation. Those are processes of accountability, so that we know where are you going to spend our money, and if they don't spend that money the way we actually had expected, that we call them to accountability.
You know, the term is 5 years. But there are those elected leaders who imagine that it must be 5. I would like to suggest that 5 is the limit, but it can be less.
if your members decide that they don't think you should do the 5, they are likely to recall you.
They are likely to recall you.
And they are likely to impeach you and to recall you. I think the only difficult one to do is the presidential. That's more set in... although the president can also be impeached by parliamentarians, but it's a little more difficult. The processes are more difficult, but it can also be done. So yes, you are right. 5 is the maximum limit, but should your members feel you are not delivering what they wanted you to do, actually it can be shortened.
Now, let's speak to the whole space of therapy. How can we encourage, because it's part of the closure, and then those who, without accepting or subjecting themselves to the process of grief therapy, spiritual therapy, then you have within you bitterness that only keeps increasing, which then may create the illusion of peace because there's the absence of stress, of conflict. How can the church play a part in that?
I think allow me just to mention that the loss of an election is actually leads to a grieving process. And the grieving process may not exactly be to the level of a death in the family, but it's real. You go through a process of grieving because it's an unfulfilled expectation. And not just an unfulfilled expectation, a very expensive unfulfilled expectation where some people have spent millions, perhaps billions of shillings, and then you do not get the prize that you had aimed for. Now, when that happens, you go through a grieving process. And one may recognize that is what they are going through. One may not recognize that is what they are going through. A grieving process that may lead almost into depression, a grieving process that may actually make one lose contact with reality. And in that process, I think it is important that people be able to speak it out. And speak it out in terms of either you have friends with whom you debrief, people that you go to and you are able to share out openly. This is what I went through, or you have family members with whom you debrief, or even go through what you have called a therapy. And by therapy, I mean counseling process. And we as a church have actually a counseling process, and we have announced this publicly, that any politician who does need assistance and help in counseling, in CITAM, we do have counseling processes, not only in all our assemblies, but also in Valley Road. We have a space where you can come into and you can be assisted and helped through this process. Because it is a grieving process, people need to be counseled, or you seek other, if I may call it, professional help somewhere, just to help you walk through this journey. It may be for the politician who has lost, but it also may be for the candidates who are supporting the politician. Because of the emotional investment that you put in the electioneering process, you actually are left in a stage where you are devastated. Your hopes are shattered, and for whatever reason, you're feeling let down. And sometimes I've reflected on why we get so emotionally involved in our politics, why I call it emotional democracy. I think sometimes the political arena has been viewed as the only way where either your community or your area will be able to get certain resources if your person is in that space. Sometimes it has been viewed as the only space where you will get security. If someone else is in power, you don't have this kind of security that you are going to have. The national cake will not be on your table if your person is not there. Employments, future employments, your people or your friends will not get any employment at all if your person is not there. And because of this space where we have the winner take it all within the Kenyan political arena, those who lose begin seeing it's not just a loss of an election, it's a loss of all these other things as well. And as a result of that, the fear, the anxiety that they experience is extremely deep. And that's why we say, if possible, and you feel you are going through a process that is really, really discouraging, you can actually seek professional help, including coming to any of our churches. We are available to assist.
And are there scenarios in the Bible where leaders may not, there are those who may have offered themselves for leadership or the challenge that they had. Do you have any examples that you can point to in the Bible and say, yes, what we are going through now is not necessarily new? They say anything and everything that is happening actually has happened. It just depends on the context with which you're looking at.
The Bible is an amazing book. The Bible, some people have said, is perhaps more political than Che Guevara's books or Mao Zedong or the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's Green Book. In terms of political engagement, you have in the Bible people vying for position. You have in the Bible people changing allegiances. They were supporting this person, they change allegiance to support a different person. You are in the Bible people being appointed to positions of leadership. And within the arena that we find in the Bible, we sometimes find three, if I may call it, three categories of leaders. We find leaders who are appointed by God. And sometimes God sends an individual, go and anoint so-and-so to be the next leader. And then you find leaders who are appointed by the people. The people decide it's so-and-so, and out of popularity, out of choice, they begin to shout, so-and-so for leadership, so-and-so is king, and they begin announcing someone as king. Then thirdly, you find leaders who have chosen themselves. And the ones who have chosen themselves go to such an extent that in the Bible, we actually even find assassinations. Hazael goes and assassinates the predecessor, king of Syria, becomes the king of Syria. We find assassinations in the Bible. And in the Bible, we find voting, particularly when it comes to church leadership towards early days. We find voting also being exercised. And those who did not win supports those who had won as the one who had been chosen. And the Bible would say it seemed good to us and to the Holy Spirit that this person, particular person, has taken on the position of leadership. Now, when we see all these ranges of choices in the Bible in terms of leadership choices, in terms of positions of leadership, I think we need to begin looking at ourselves and being, if I may use the word, just a little cautious in supporting our MCA, our member of parliament, and our senator, our governor, our president, in saying that this is God's choice. So we need to be a little cautious in that. And the reason why I'm saying we need to be a little cautious is that I happen to read a lot on political issues. So looking at what has happened in the continent of Africa in terms of candidates and individuals who came in, and when they came in, they were being viewed more or less as God's choices. I start from, within the evangelical circles and political engagements, I start from Chiluba of Zambia. And Chiluba of Zambia was actually coming from a Pentecostal church, voted in on popularity. This is a Christian president who is going to make Zambia. He even declared so. I wanted to change the constitution to make Zambia a Christian country. And 2 years down the road, Chiluba turned bad. And it turned bad like a bad egg. And turned so bad that he ended badly. Now, when it turned bad, people began now saying, this is the Christian president.
So they're vilifying now the faith. That
yes, now they are attacking Christianity. This is your candidate. There he is. So have him. We saw this in Ghana at Willis, I think, who actually even said he was going to turn Ghana into a huge prayer meeting. Actually, he used terminology of spiritual warfare, a huge place for spiritual warfare. We saw that in Gabo, and Gabo is an interesting one in Ivory Coast.
Yes.
A Marxist initially, then later on became a person of faith, and such an evangelical Pentecostal kind of faith that he even began enforcing certain Christian principle into the country. And then down the road, civil conflict issues out of the country. In the end result, Gabo was being tried in ICC. A Christian leader who the Christian had hailed, this is our leader. Not too long ago, I was in a prayer breakfast where Abiy Ahmed, the president of Ethiopia, was. Again, a vibrant Christian who's been raised up, a person of faith who makes his faith openly. I heard him testifying openly about his faith. And then this conflict has come. And his soldiers are being accused of committing atrocities in the Tigray region. He is still a Christian, but now do we want to identify with these actions if that is true? And I'm just saying if that is true. We now have in Malawi our very own bishop who has become the president, and he's being watched. Will he fulfill the mandate so that the Christian values are actually influencing his leadership? So far, he has done very well. And one would pray that he would continue
trajectory, yes.
on that same trajectory. So I'm saying this just to bring out the point that Christians need to be very, very cautious. That when we look at the Bible and we look at the way people have behaved in terms of leadership, there are lessons that we need to learn from that in coming out in such a way that people don't throw away God as part of the garbage when they're throwing out a leader.
And therein is the whole aspect of we need to be seen in terms of our Christianity as active, it is lifestyle, it is where we are in all the spaces. But that in itself has raised the bar. Because, truth be told, spiritual warfare is real. And there are those who, the evil one would want you to fail and amplify where you're falling short. And then that is what, will be seen, amplified as falling short of delivery. Because it's like the marking scheme is secular.
That's right.
You've got a secular marking scheme in a spiritual context.
Yes.
So how do you navigate? Because you cannot give up.
I think what you're asking is very important. And perhaps I need to mention here that when we are choosing a president, when we are choosing a governor, we are not choosing a pastor. Neither are we choosing a preacher. We are choosing an individual whose mandate and responsibility have been enshrined in the Constitution. And those mandates and responsibility are not necessarily pastoral, neither are they evangelistic or evangelical.
Yes.
The only difference is that the person who goes in as a Christian brings their evangelical faith to influence them so that they need to be a better person in terms of operation, and not necessarily that we are expecting them to be preachers in that position. And if we actually are having our leaders going out there and we will be looking at them and thinking, he's not the preacher we thought he would be, we are using wrong measures. A president is a president of Muslim. If he is a Christian president, is a president of Muslims, of Hindus, of Buddhists, of everybody, including atheists who are within the country. So once he's elected as a president, he's not just the Christian's president, he's the president of everyone. Now, his Christian faith may influence how he acts in certain situations and may influence how he conducts himself and may influence some policies that he approves. But that Christian faith is not necessarily what he will use to rule everyone else. He uses the set standards which are national and which are, if I may say so, secular. I don't want to use the word secular too much because secular tends to throw out God.
Right.
Yeah.
And we then need to appreciate that leadership has its challenges. And, well, you get the votes, because it's about numbers at the end of the day in how we choose our leaders. But it can be very lonely up there. Pastors too need pastoring, pastor leaders.
That's right. Recently, we were having a conversation, I'm part of a certain group. We were having some conversation, and one of our friends said that maybe we actually are expecting our leaders to be angels. And none of our leaders can be angels. So I think let's view them as human beings who sometimes fail, who have weaknesses as human beings who are ordinary, who sometimes may make wrong judgments, who may sometimes make mistakes. Especially if they're able to come back and say, there, I made a mistake. And we see this even in the space in which we are finding ourselves in, where some people need to say certain things, and they're not saying the things that they need to say, either in terms of apology or in terms of commendations. They are not saying the things they need to say. We need to come to that space where we are saying, yes, our leaders are human beings, and as human beings, we need not expect them to be angels. And what therefore, I think I've also had conversations with some people in positions of leadership, and what they do need is support. Because anyone who comes to position of leadership will be criticized, and they will also be commended. And sometimes the criticism will be on their policies, on their actions, and sometimes they are criticized because people don't have the big picture that they have as leaders. People only are seeing one particular angle, but their decisions are based on a wider big picture, and so they may be criticized. What is necessary for us is to encourage them. An old Baptist minister has written a book, My Dalliance with Governance. He used to be a minister here in Kenya, and this book that he has written, he basically says, how do you deal and interact with governance? And I've had one-on-one conversation with him, and he gave me an advice that you cannot speak power, you cannot speak truth to power and be a celebrity at the same time.
No.
What he actually pointed out is that if you have access to leaders in private, and you are able to encourage them and share with them in private, there is no need for you to go to the media and say, so-and-so, I'm telling you this, when actually already you have access to them. We are not called, especially the clergy, to be the opposition to the government. Neither are we called to be court poets,
No.
where ours is to just sing how this government is good all the time, or where ours is to oppose a government. That's not our calling as the clergy. Our calling is pastoral, and our calling is to be able to encourage them. And that encouraging them sometimes may mean doing it in private. And if I have access to a leader in private, I do not have to shout some things in public when I actually have access to them in private.
Wow. And somebody the other day told me that, when you're a leader, you can't please everybody all the time. Otherwise, go and sell ice cream. Then maybe you might just get a chance there. You might just get an opportunity there. Now, at the individual level, because for you to be a leader, there must be those who are led. Break it down practically at the individual level. What's our role? What's our responsibility? Especially because leadership, you may look at it up, but then I want to speak now laterally in terms of the environment that we're in. How should we engage? How do we accommodate each other? Because there was opportunity to select, elect. We may not necessarily have had the same preference, but we're still here. We were there before, we're here during the process, and we're here after the process. How do we engage? Sometimes even in the same home, you find that it's so fractured that they can't continue on.
Yes.
And you have stress in the family.
Yeah.
In the place of prayer.
This is, I think, a space where we are finding ourselves right now, dealing with the aftermath of the elections. There have been casualties in the process and people who have been hurt and wounded in the process. And both those who are vying for political positions and those who are supporting them, the voters. And in this space, the way we voted, particularly for the presidential election, almost shows us that Kenya voted right in the middle. One half of the country voted for one candidate, and one half of the country voted for another candidate. So as we speak right now, there are almost close to 7 million people who are very happy and are celebrating, and similarly, close to 7 million people who are very unhappy and disappointed, and who are nursing a wound. How do we continue on in this nation? I think one of the things that we need to come into grips with is that, as I've already pointed out, those who are celebrating need not to be made to feel guilty that they have actually won. We should not push a dagger into them, why have you won, and make them feel guilty, so that their celebration should be curtailed that they have won. They need to celebrate their winning, but they need to celebrate responsibly. What do I mean by celebrating responsibly? Celebrating responsibly is in such a way that you are not ridiculing the loser. You are not poking fun at the loser. You are not diminishing the value of the loser. You are not making them feel insignificant. You are not dehumanizing them through that process. And you actually show some kind of magnanimity.
Yes.
Yes, I've won, but we are in the same country. We are one people, and this is all ours. Let's go on together. So that for the winner is extremely important over the coming period of time as we look ahead. That stretching out of the hand so that we are able to walk and work together. If you are the person who has the hammer and you keep on hitting the person who is on the ground, there's no reason to do that. You have already won. There's no reason to do that. So rejoice, celebrate, but celebrate responsibly. On the other hand, as they celebrate, they also need to be sensitive to the loser. And one of the areas of sensitivity is not to rubbish their grieving, because grieving is a process, and that process sometimes takes time. So you should not be hurried through grieving. A person has lost a mother, and you're saying, oh, the mother is gone now.
Let's get on, let's move.
Rise up, let's move on. You really should not say that to a grieving person, because they are hurting. They need to be nursed back to reality and to life, and words of affirmation needs to be spoken to them. Reassuring words need to be spoken to them so that they are actually able to come out of where they are. So if we are to bring the losers to a place where they are on the table, I think how we handle them is very, very important. On the other hand, those who have lost, I think need to come to a space where they recognize these are the democratic processes that we have put in our constitution. And as a result of those democratic processes, it's very unlikely that those who are voted in, all the 6 candidates that you voted in, won. One or two of them may have lost, and that may include even a presidential candidate. And since these are the statutory guidelines that we have put in our constitution and our laws on how people ought to behave, and they automatically mean that there will be winners and there will be losers. And if that is the case, if I have come out and I'm bearing the brunt of having lost, I need to grieve, but grieve in such a way that I am grieving also responsibly, sensitively, so that I do not attack the others. I do not create walls. I say, yes, this time you may have won, but we pray we can still be able to work together. And in working together, some may say, no, you have your position out there as the opposition. We have our position out there as the people in government. Nothing like handshakes as we have been having in the country. Stay in your space. But even if they stay in their space, which is a constitutional space, we need still to relate together in such a way that we are building ourselves together as a country. When we talk of dialogue normally within in theological settings, dialogue is a process. It's a process that you can have one group of people who take on, treat one another as enemies. From enemies, we move to competitors, and competitors, we move to friends, and it's a process. And if you view one person as an enemy is a person to be destroyed. So even if they have lost the election, you still are thinking, how do I destroy them completely?
How to vanquish them.
How do I vanquish them completely? Now, that's not where we are at. That this person has lost, and since I have the power and I have the ability, let me seek to totally vanquish them, that they will never rise up again. That's not where we are at. We were in the space of competition, and this competitor had their day, but they didn't come out. So we need to move them to the friendship level. We've competed. Now let's work as friends. Let's build our country together. And I think if we go that direction, we will come out better in the nation in the final end.
Because indeed then, when you are a leader, just resetting and appreciating that yours is not to lord over, but is actually servant leadership.
That's true.
And when you now deliver on the opportunity that because that opportunity is really delegated opportunity that you've been given. It's not yours by right, but delegated to now see how you can pull and move everybody else up. And that is how you will, be able to, in 5 years' time, if you want to offer yourself again, it'll be very apparent that, yes, yours was the right choice that you made.
Yeah, when a person comes into that position of leadership, and already we are beginning to see the kind of characters that some are manifesting. We've seen coming up, and already they are issuing threats and intimidation to people who did not support them in one way or another, and saying, you prepare to pack up and leave. And when we begin to see that, we are saying, this is not the right kind of material for leadership.
No.
No, they are already showing something that is not good. A servant leader is exemplified by the Lord Jesus Christ in the book of John, chapter 13, where he actually comes out and he begins to wash the disciples' feet. I'm out here for service. And that's a passage of scripture that I've done exposition on again and again, because it shows us some 4 kinds of leaders, that passage of scripture. It shows us the servant leader, exemplified by Jesus. But that same passage of scripture again and again speaks about a betrayal. It speaks about Judas. So it shows us the greedy leader, the betraying leader, the leader who organizes for thugs to come and arrest Jesus Christ, the leader of the underworld, the leader who, the resources, public resources are there, the leader who dips his hands into public resources. It shows us Peter, the temperamental leader who comes up and occasionally can even cut your ear with a sword. And then it shows us one of the other disciples who asks about love and the whole idea of love one another, that Jesus comes out with. Looking at that spectrum of leadership in John chapter 13, servant leadership is the ultimate kind of leadership, where you come into leadership with the attitude that I am supposed to be of service to the people. They have given me this position as a trust, and I need to be a steward of the position, a steward of the resources, a steward of the power that I have, a steward to the people. And if you're a Christian, you need to add a steward to God as well. In that position. And if you're not a steward, you will misuse and abuse the position that you have rather than becoming a servant leader.
Is there a place for a term that I've had, benevolent dictator?
Thank you. That term is a good term, and it has been used in a reference to people like Lee Kuan Yew, Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. I've read his biography, I've lived in Singapore as well. A man who took this island, who was in every sense of the way a small fishing island, and turned it into one would almost say a fourth world country, a country that is extremely well developed, highly developed. But his methods and styles of leadership was not soft style. It was heavy-handed in terms of his leadership. He did not condone any kind of mistake. In fact, if one of his leaders went out, at some point, I think a minister was entertained and taken to hosted by someone else. By the time the minister arrived at the airport,
he had been fired.
He put rules in the country to the extent they say Singapore is a fine country, and the word fine there is not fine in terms of good.
Literally being fined.
You fined for everything you do, you are fined for it. An amazing kind of, one would almost say heavy-handedness, but heavy-handedness towards good. It was directing, you could not accuse him of benefiting out of that.
No.
You could not accuse him and say he grabbed here, the resources he used here. No, he was using it all for the benefit of his country. Now, the same has been said of President Kagame of Rwanda. Just bringing out a point that Kagame of Rwanda at some point read a book by one of the Christian leaders, The Purpose-Driven Life. And when he read this book, The Purpose-Driven Life, he actually asked this Christian leader who wrote the book, is it possible to create a purpose-driven nation? And the Christian leader who wrote this book, yes, it is possible to create a purpose-driven nation, began working with Kagame. I have been in a meeting where this leader was actually involved in Rwanda and basically trying to encourage and developing, brought in architects, brought in city mappers, Kigali mapped according to these Christian city mappers, the health system in Rwanda to the extent, you remember they are using drones to drop.
Right.
Based on that whole idea, is it possible to create a purpose-driven life? But the way he's doing it is heavy. It doesn't tolerate
any shortfalls.
Yes, it doesn't. Yes. It's heavy-handed. But he's actually benefiting the country. He's not benefiting himself, as far as we know. He's not benefiting himself. So he's a benevolent leader. Yes, I think there may be space for that, provided they are selfless kind of individuals.
And there is what you'd call development that is tangible, that you can see, feel, and touch. But as we use that as the yardstick for measuring how we're evolving and advancing as a nation, isn't there a possibility that we miss out on the soul, on the heart? Is it also in tandem? How do we reconcile? How do we make sure that that doesn't lose out? If anything, you probably would rather have the evolution, development of the soul, less of the other.
Like we pointed out, I think the leader's mandate is very different. It's not necessarily a preacher and a pastor. The pastors need to be quite keen and concerned with the souls and the hearts of people. But leaders also, as the saying goes, like leader, so goes the people. If you have a leader who is condoning corruption, if you have a leader who is involved with the underworld, that's a license to the people to be involved in the same kind of thing. So the people engage in licentious kind of activities because they feel our leader is giving us the permission. If he's doing it, why should we not do it? So yes, in that kind of scenario, I think the heart is very, very important, that the kind of heart that you bring into leadership will be a heart that actually can bring transformation to the people. In terms of, in comparison, do we actually need just to have external development that is visible, that is tangible, that we can see a nation has moved from point A to point B, and not have development that's also soul-oriented, spiritual-oriented? It's probably like the whole debate that is taking place in the American space, the Republican, the Democrat kind of debate, where Democrats are being seen as anti-family, Democrats are being seen as anti-spirituality, as bringing in laws and regulations that necessarily don't relate with God. And Republicans are being seen as conservatives, as people who will preserve their the family and their culture. So Christians tended to support more of the Republicans than the Democrats, especially evangelical Christians. But when the Republican leader turned out to be Trump and it turned out the way it turned out, the evangelicals have been thrown out, and now they are struggling to recover their space again in being able to speak into the nation, because they cared for the soul, but the way they cared for the soul, they actually missed out on the personality that they were supporting, not knowing this a very temperamental personality who can go any direction. Now, evangelicals, we need to care for the soul, and I think we need to pray that any leader that we have in the country would create an atmosphere where we can preach anywhere in the country, where churches can be registered, where we actually, people can change their faith, where churches can be planted anywhere. Christians, and not just churches, because it's not just a president for Christians. It's all religions, people of faith can be able to practice their faith without hindrance and limitation at all. And we do believe that should be the direction that we should go as leaders. And when they create such an atmosphere, then possibilities of taking care of the spiritual, of nourishment of the soul actually comes into being.
And as we're beginning to wind down, speak to the values that then is the softer side of life. You can't legislate good manners. You can't say from tomorrow we'll all be good people.
Although that statement is true, that it cannot be legislated, and attempts have been made to legislate good manners, and instead they just increase the number of prisoners that you have, or
yes.
The number of people who are taken to court keeps the courts busy. What we do see, and something that I think perhaps we need to continue reflecting on as Kenyans, that if you visit other nations, you can actually find a space where the newspaper vendor would leave their newspaper there, and a person, and he's not there, and a person would go
and take and just
pay and drop the money,
yes,
and take the newspaper. In the Netherlands, people were selling milk.
Yes.
You just leave your milk on there with this automatic machine, and someone would come and buy the milk and drop. Now, when something like that is in the suke, is in the mind of a nation, that within their cultures, they have actually developed certain values, certain ethos that safeguard them, not because they are Christians, but because they value these things as things that will keep our nation together. When people come to a point where they agree that when you are driving, this is the way you need to drive, keep to your side of the road. When the lights turn red, you stop.
Then you move.
Then you move and they agree. Now, those are ethos that needs to be ingrained within a nation, and not necessarily because the nation is Christian, but because they have agreed on certain values that they are saying these values would actually help us to move ahead as a nation, and these are values that needs to be espoused by every citizen, regardless of what their faith is. Because they will help us as a nation. Now, that's something that seems to be lacking. And in my mind, I've thought, how did these other nations reach there? I've concluded that they started early. They trained the children, raised the children to such an extent that if you went the the community would frown on you if you went certain direction, because that's not the way it is done. And raise the children to such an extent that there were some things that were never done.
Indeed. You know, there is the scripture that says, train the child in the way he should go, and they will not depart from it
That's true.
When they grow older. And that then looks at Kenya. We, at the last census, and indeed even now, we said to be a very youthful population. But again, a greater portion of that didn't get involved in the electoral process. But again, youth is a moving target, as it were, profile. Sooner than later, if they don't get involved, get engaged, and get disconnected, is that recipe in terms of a time bomb? How can the church then, acknowledging, start early, as you've spoken, speak to the youth and engage the whole profile of of a nation?
Yeah, that's true. Kenya is actually said to be a fairly youthful nation. I think the median age is estimated to be around 19 years, which is very, very young. And a number of those youth did not register to vote. And the records from IEBC is showing us that the majority of the voters are actually the older generation, 35 and above, when actually the majority of the country is less than that, which means the youth needs to be encouraged through civic education, and we need to continue encouraging them that they do have a role to play in this nation, not just in the now, but also in the future. And that process, therefore, requires a mentoring of the young people, particularly targeting and thinking through, are there some key leaders within the country that we actually can mentor? In my earlier days, I used to be involved in a Christian organization that was working with young people, students in colleges and universities. And at some point, we felt that we needed to encourage certain ones of them to begin thinking of getting involved in politics. And now I can mention a number of them who are in the political arena, whom we touch base with at that level. And now they are involved within the political arena. And I think that's important for us to reflect on, that even as a church body, the systems that we have right from Sunday school, being able to train the children and equip them, not just on the spiritual only, but to be holistic in terms of their involvement and engagement, and going on with them to the point where, as young people in high school, we have mentoring processes to help them process career choices, including not just career in pastoral ministry and in spiritual ministry, but also career in political sphere, career in of engagement even within the public service. That will help in the long run in developing another generation that actually processes and thinks through involvement within the political arena as we offer them mentorship along the way.
Place of prayer as we wind down.
Thank you very much. Very, very important, because when we come to the point of prayer, we are actually making an acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that we are making is that we have a sovereign and a supreme God who is in charge of the universe. And our God is a God who holds everything in the power of his hand. And he is the Lord God who gives guidance and direction in as far as the future is concerned. So it is important for us as Christians to continue praying for our nation, praying for our leaders, and praying that the Bible gives us areas in which we need to pray. Pray that we may live peacefully, and that we may live in such a way that we honor God, such a way that God's word is proclaimed. I think we need to be involved in that. Yes, there is a space for prayer. Pray for our country, pray for the leadership, and pray that the sovereign God would, who is able to turn the heart of the king, that's what the Bible says, is able to turn the heart of the king, would turn the hearts of our leaders at respective stages of involvement, so that they would be leaders who would actually look to the welfare of the people rather than to themselves.
Wonderful. And with that prayerful note, we acknowledge that the church has been engaging before the elections. The church has been engaging during the elections. And the church indeed is engaging post the elections. You and I are the church. We have a role to play. Thank you very much, Bishop Callisto. It's been wonderful hosting you.
Thank you, Edmund.
Let's do this next week, same time, same place. Remember, keep it hope. Asante sana. God bless.
Are you a talented youth between the ages of 18 and 24 years? The Rav. Can you sing? Can you dance? Where Hujafua Mike or any other performances? The Rav. Auditions will take place beginning in Kisumu on the 8th of September, followed by Mombasa, Nakuru, Eldoret, and Nairobi on dates to be communicated. The Rav is a chance to showcase your talent in music, dance, poetry, acrobatics, and more, and stand a chance to win 300,000 shillings, a recording deal at Hope Recording Studios, and many more prizes. To register, send an SMS starting with #The Rav with your name, county, and talent to 22232. That is 22232 to get an invite to auditions happening near you. For more information, please call 0709 861 223. That is 0709 861 223, or log on to www.hopemediakenya.org for details. The Rav, identifying talent, inspiring passion. Powered by Hope FM and Hope TV.
Coming up this September, CITAM Springboard Convention 2022 with fresh anointing to radiate God's glory as we reach out to the lost. Mark and save these dates from the 20th to the 24th September 2022 at CITAM Valley Road. The convention is themed Till the Whole World Hears and will definitely revive and uplift your faith. The Bible tells us in Matthew chapter 24 verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Get ready for the Springboard Convention 2022. You don't want to miss it.